Hey everyone, this is Nico Anna Jean, and I am so excited to be here today with Carol Westmore, who is coming to talk with us about the power of storytelling. And she is going to also share some exciting things about a new book that's coming out. So I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to Carol, and please do give us an update on what's going on with you and what's going on with this book.
Well, thanks, Nicola. It's so great to be here. And, we know that you brought out your book, and I'm sure you included a lot of storytelling in that book. I read the book, but I mean, you can tell us about that. But basically, from my many years as a journalist, I came to understand the power of storytelling. And even when I was promoting self help authors like Brandon Bays and Byron Katie, when they came to South Africa, I was a promoter for self help books. I realized that it was the story that drew people to them. And in this information age, I just want to say that where AI can tell us anything, it's not enough to have the information. And this is good for your coaches or for anyone who's listening. So there are three aspects to telling a story, and never before with AI has it been more important to take the information you know and implement it with first-hand experience and your personality. If you just
Right.
telling how, let's say EFT, let's take that. If you're just going to tell about tapping and how it reduces, how science now, and it is exciting, science now proves how it works. However, what about the fact that there's a story? And that's why I began to collect these stories. There were websites, even on Gary Craig's day, and I think in the EFT universe, where people would put their stories, but I wanted it in a book so that the world could read these, not just other EFT people. So I
Right.
began, that's how this project of Tap into Your Best Life began. It was collating some people's stories, and who wants to be in a book that shares your story? But little did I know, my first idea was to have a book that was 360 days of tapping a year, 365 days of tapping. And then I approached some people and they said, that's going to be a lot of authors to collate. So I went back to that. This is quite a chunky book. There are 30 stories in the book.
Wow.
But the point is, I had writing parties with my knowledge as a writer and knowing what I know now about stories. And we have to keep up because we all know about reels and we have to you have to hook people. In fact, let me go through the 5 stages of a story that you have to know today. There's the hook scene, drop us into the moment. Well, these are the way I write the stories of 1,500 words, and then I'll go back to someone who's very famous for giving 60-second stories. So you in writing my chapter blueprint for this book, I told people to drop us into the moment of something happening. So one person saying, I was sitting on Zoom, and this is her story is about eczema and how she heals people with tapping, not heals, but how she uses tapping with eczema to bring down the whole inflammation story. And she starts hers with Mary was, sitting opposite me, scratching, scratching, scratching. She was desperate. She'd gone off her cortisone. She didn't want to be on cortisone her whole life. She couldn't hold her own child, and so her story begins. And then once you've dropped people into the moment, well, then what happened? Then you go back and you say, well, this all began. And in her case, she goes back to the fact that she was plagued with the fact that her own son, her own baby, when she gave birth to him, had eczema, and she didn't know what to do about it. So she went on a journey and has now become a healing expert in that area, using, among other things, EFT. So there's some the other story that I really gives an example of is the story of the woman who's sitting by her son's bedside, and it's called "Tapping for My Dying Son." He had suddenly contracted dengue fever in Malaysia. They were on holiday visiting family. She's from Australia, and he developed this dengue fever, and the doctors had him in ICU, and he was basically said, "Ma, am I going to die?" Now, she had only used EFT for stress, but she believed in faith and she began tapping. And
Mm.
by the end, his platelets dropped, and it's a fascinating, amazing, miraculous story where she used tapping and her faith and prayers to bring him back from the edge of what she believed was death's door.
Yeah.
So yes, so when people read an anthology, and we know about Chicken Soup for the Soul, and people are calling this book Chicken Soup for the Soul, but for the EFT tapping community. When people read those stories, there's something that happens, Nico, when you hear a story. And it's called, I think, your brain synchronizes with the person listening, and they release oxytocin, the empathy hormone, which bridges the gap between you and them. So when we tell a story, the listener says, and also has the effect that if it can happen for them, it could happen for me. So
Right.
it's a me too thing as well as them feeling empathy for you as you tell your story. So you connect. So if your future clients, if you tell your story, and obviously we don't tell a story that still triggers us. We
Right.
know as coaches and healers, we need to have moved through and healed ourselves from the trauma or our
Right.
inner child. But when it comes to sharing the moment where we didn't know what to do, where we were disempowered, and got through that, that has a huge effect on telling you, helping people relate to you. And so you go from sometimes feeling like a victim to a hero as you restory your life. Now, one of the things, I'm not sure if all coaches do this, but in matrix reimprinting, we go back and retell the story as it could have happened if this person hadn't been the trauma hadn't been unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and they had no resources. So we give them resources they didn't have. And yes, it's in the imagination, but it's also in the neural pathways of the brain. And
Right.
so they say that when you, in narrative therapy, when you restory your life, your brain remembers the latest story you tell, which is why talk therapy that goes through trauma and only talks about the trauma without going into what I believe is, the somatic approach, sometimes just re-triggers people. And there's a story, again, in this book about Tracy, who yes, who was a teacher. She got post-traumatic stress syndrome from the way that the children, the teenagers, were treating her, and the staff didn't support her. So she got put off work, and they sent her. They sent her for talk therapy over and over and over. And she'd go to a shopping center after this therapy, and she'd see some of the students, and she'd get triggered again. And she didn't know what to do. So she began looking online, and she found tapping. And she went for some sessions, and it completely transformed her whole life. So we're not saying talk therapy doesn't help at all. But in her case, when she had to face a panel of psychiatrists who said, we're going to send you back for more talk therapy, she said, no, I'm not going for more talk therapy. I want EFT. And now she's come out of that experience to actually go back into schools and to speak to businesses about how tapping can help them become more empowered. So those are the kind of stories that had Dr. Peter Stapleton, who, as we know, is a scientific researcher. She's written the preface in the book, and she was on my podcast, and she said, this is the kind of book I wish I'd had 20 years ago when I first discovered EFT. So she's saying that these stories are powerful in explaining and revealing the many ways that tapping can help people. And so I don't want to make this all about the book, but I'm obviously very passionate about it because when you are bringing a book to birth, which it comes to birth on April the 17th, you go over and over and over the stories, and you make sure that you've got the formatting is perfect, and that every person in the book, in my case, has a biography where people can reach them. And so at the moment, I'm just using that as a story, but I'll move to something which may amuse you in this day and age with TikTok and Reels. There's a woman called Jenny, Hoyos, and she is an expert in helping tell a story in 60 seconds. And she says, start with a hook, like a surprising question, build constant progression. So people are asking what's going to happen. Let there be conflict and uncertainty, and then give a payoff and a quick resolution. Now, you think, again, I'm just telling you like the facts, information. But I can tell you one of the stories that she's famous for. It's about cooking a hamburger in her car while going through a fast food drive through. So her question she started was, can I cook a full burger inside a car faster than a fast food drive through can make me? And in 60 seconds, you see this happening. Her mother's driving. She starts cooking the hamburger. Her mother says, these fumes are going to, are going to set us on fire. And and she's cooking this hamburger. She gets to the fast food window, and then she says, well, have I cooked the hamburger? She said, well, it was raw, but I did cook a hamburger in the time it took us. So, there's the power. People stayed to the end. That was the point.
Right, right,
So so she's saying that you need, and if you can think about that, when I look back on my podcast, I used to have, today we've got this person, and then I would have the music. I mean, this is 5 years ago. I would have the introduction, and then I'd go back. Now I take a clip that's riveting because I've looked at how the other podcasters are doing it, and I start with that. So the person watching it sees this riveting quote, and then I say what it's about, and then I introduce the person, and then I go back to letting them tell their story. So
right.
this is the way. If you look at, Mel, is it Mel Robbins or the big podcast Diary of a CEO? Not that I'm a big but I'm just trying to follow the trends that make people, instead of people thinking, I haven't got time to sit and wait for the music of this podcast. So that's the way, storytelling is going today. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've got any questions to ask me.
Well, actually I was just going to comment, on the idea of first of all that storytelling, telling your own story, like you said, understanding your own story in your journey of healing and transformation, and then being able to tell someone else that because they can connect with you and relate to you, right? They need to actually be able to relate to you in order for them to open up enough to even listen to your story. And then, like you said, when they can relate to you and then they can hear your story and they're like, wow, I'm not that different from this person. If they could do this, so could I. And then that
Yeah,
opens them up to the actual, information or tool or whatever it is that's the pathway to the transformation. And I
correct.
know, like in coaching, like you said, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that we do as coaches is in understanding our niche of the client we work with, is that our ideal client is always us, a few steps behind us, and we have to learn how to speak to them, to tell a little of our story so they can see themselves in us and be able to relate to us.
Yes, yes. Well, two of the most famous people in the past that I represented where I learned this were Brandon Bays and Byron Katie. Now, Brandon had had a tumor the size of a football when she was working for Tony Robbins as the health coach. She used to go on stage and tell people how to, improve their health, drink water, and all that. And she developed this tumor the size of a football in her uterus. And Tony Robbins said, well, take time off. I'm sure you'll sort it. And she went on this inner journey using this process that she calls the journey. And in 6.5 weeks, and she did other things, she went on I think, juice fast and things like that. But the big thing was she realized that underneath the physical trauma was what Candace Pert had said there were the molecules of emotion were causing this within her. And you had to learn to basically forgive and let go, whatever it was you were holding on to. And we know that now, but this was, if you think about it, 20 years ago, she had discovered this. So when I picked up her book actually in a bookshop in South Africa, and it was at the time of the new South Africa, I realized she not only had a powerful story to tell, but like me, she'd had a fire. I had a fire and I'd lost my dog in the fire in my home. So I could relate to her. And I related to being an ex journalist, or being a journalist even at the time, that I could write a story about her and invite people to her workshop. So I asked her to come to South Africa. And at a time when forgiveness was high on the agenda after the days of apartheid, and there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happening. And so she did, in the end, I'll cut a long story short. But what sold people to her workshops was her story. that she had this tumor and that she had this inner directed process which she could share. And she actually put the process in the book. That was the other thing about her. She didn't say, I'll share it at my workshops. She actually put it in the book. And then the other person was Byron Katie. And although she didn't always lead with her story, when you actually hear the fact that she was an absolute wreck and she was lying on the floor of a rehabilitation center when a cockroach walked over her foot, and she got enlightened. She realized that she was the cause, or her mind was causing all this pain and agony that she'd been through. And she says in her, when I heard her story, that she was like the wicked witch of the West to her family. So when she came home and she was this peaceful person, people couldn't believe the difference in her. And the only way she could explain what had happened was through her 4 steps that she teaches. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? Who would you be without that thought? And then turn it around. Where are you? Actually, again, there's story in there. Where are you guilty of what you're accusing? The person shouldn't do this or shouldn't be like that. So those are learned in those days as a journalist, and then promoting the people that would draw people to them had this deep emotional story, and often of overcoming some huge, challenge that they'd had in their life. But of course, they were at a stage where they could share from having overcome it, but their stories still made them relatable.
Yeah, and I think that also points to something that I do talk about a lot, as far as when I talk about inner child work and reparenting, and you were just talking about matrix reimprinting, which is, working on the quantum level to rewrite the story, right? But
Correct.
it's interesting how I found that until we address the original, like you're talking about, the original trauma, and then in EFT, we use techniques like tell the story, or other
Yeah,
techniques to bring the charge or the sub level, so to speak, down on an event. And once the charge comes down enough on an event, like say it's a 10, and it comes
yes,
to like a 5, then if you can, and in the work that I do, you bring the inner adult into the memory, and the adult then changes what happens because the adult brings the child the resources and the things that they needed that they didn't have, and literally
exactly. That is
changes.
matrix reimprinting. That
Yeah.
is, and then at the end of it, you tell a new story. But you first go and help the child as your adult self. You actually
Yeah.
tap on her.
Right, right. And so it's interesting how, and it's funny because I've never been trained in matrix reimprinting, but that's
No,
what actually organically involved in my work based on Neville Goddard's revision work that he had
yes,
written about.
yes, yes. I think
Revision.
matrix reimprinting has got a lot of, what are they? What are the people? The shamanic work in it. The concept, but he's just packaged it in a way that if you're tapping on the person, as well as revising it. No, you're right. It's not a completely unique way of dealing with things, but the interesting thing is how it revises the story so that you leave. And sometimes you're talking about, tell the story. It's not always something we do publicly. When you're working with a practitioner or a coach or a therapist and you're using body work, you have a chance to maybe unearth a story you've forgotten about.
Yeah.
That you just, as we know, that's often the trauma, because the trauma capsule closes off so that we can survive at the time.
Right.
So yeah, so that's why, I mean, in these days, as we know, there's a lot of stories being exposed for people who've had to who weren't believed, or whatever the truth is. So one of the reasons we've declaring that April the 17th at the launch of our book is Global Tapping Story Day. So every year we're going to, use this day to realize that we can tell our tapping stories and encourage people to tell them and share them, and just really encourage to move beyond just the facts and how fantastic it is with real stories and the range of things it can help. I mean, it's just amazing when people came forward with eczema and diabetes and, tapping when they'd only seen it, done a little bit of tapping, but using it in a life and death moment. I mean, it's just amazing. I just said, I know why I did this book. It just absolutely opened me back up to EFT because I know so many other processes. And now, just being in this community of people who use it and have healed their lives and their families and their, you know, it's just been amazing. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be actually morphing from writing my own books to bringing stories out of other people. And in fact, calling this tap into your best life, I immediately I used to have I used to publish under the name Best Life Break Free Fast Publishing, and I've changed it to Best Life Publishing. That's the name now. I'm publishing this book and other. I'm hoping to have a series of people telling their stories in this kind of chicken soup for the soul type anthology. I just have this vision of this is the time, and this is me doing what I love.
I love that vision, and it's wonderful. Isn't it wonderful to evolve and then get something new? You get a new vision and it unfolds and it moves life forward, right?
Yes, and I want to encourage people that when they do reinvent themselves, it's not an easy thing until it's done. In the beginning, you're following the breadcrumbs, you're agonizing, you're saying only three people want to be in this book. What am I going to do? Is this going to work? And then I always went back to like almost um the idea that I'm being led. I'm not. It's not me. It's coming through me, and I will just allow whatever needs to come through. And if I fail, well, I'll fail, but at least I'll have tried to bring people together. And then, funnily enough, the areas where I had a lot of input was from Australia. I had a few, Lorna Hollinger from the Australian Tapping Institute, and there were people there, and they came forward. And some of the most amazing stories are from the Australians. But then there's also England and America.
Yeah.
But I was actually amazed. I was pleasantly surprised that doors started to open and people who'd never thought they could write a story came to my what I call the writing parties, and we went through. I gave them this chapter blueprint, hook scene, drop us into the moment. What wasn't working? What are the stakes? The EFT matrix process, what you did. And originally it was going to be matrix reimprinting, but I took that away because there were other people using tapping in ways that weren't exactly one way or another. So I opened it up to people who are using tapping in their way. And then after you've used the process, what are the specific shifts and results you got? And then a gentle takeaway, a mini exercise maybe for the reader. We never actually did that in everyone, but what I know to be true, what I want to leave the reader with. There's this 1,500 words. They go through that kind of shaping of the story, if they wanted to. And the ones who didn't, I had to use my journalistic experience to make their stories and the book unputdownable from one story to the next. I'm hoping people will say that.
Well, tell us about, the launch day and this global tapping summit day. Like, tell us about how can we participate? What can we expect?
Well, what we're going to do, we're starting in the east and moving to the west. So 9 a.m. in the UK is 6 p.m. in Australia. I've got it all on a site called carolwestmore.com/launch party. And I've got everything there. So there's going to be a live stream in Australia so that they can get going with the Australians selling the book. And if it goes to number one, they're going to share screenshots as we move through England and Europe and to another tapping party in America, which will be midnight my time. But that's the time that people, will show up there, and we'll continue. So in the Australian party, our VIP guest is Dr. Peter Stapleton. She's coming in and she's going to talk about the fourth wave of therapy and what, why this book is so important. And then onto the spotlight, I'm going to bring some of the speakers to share 5 minutes of what their story is about, some of the co-authors. And so, it will just be like a launch celebration, and naming this day that we're launching it, Global Tapping Story Day, is a fantastic way of us to announce more than a book. We're announcing this global outreach of healing stories. And so let me go back to the party. If you can stay up, those of us in England, stay up till midnight. Brad Yates will be coming on as our VIP guest, and he will be leading us in intention and tapping for Global Story Day and for the book, because he's one of the, he features in the book. And I'll tell you a story with Brad. When I asked him to come into the book, I had no idea that in my meditation, the name of this book was actually one of the courses he runs called Tap Into Your Best Life. And I thought, I wonder if he's going to say, you can't use my course name. But he was so fantastic about it. But I had to give him, kudos to be in the book, because so when I have a hashtag now, it's not hashtag Tap Into Your Best Life. It's Tap Into Your Best Life book, because this is the book of tapping into your best life. So I thought I just had to share that. He's so humorous about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the story of this global day of going from the east to the west, and all the while watching the ratings on on Amazon as a bestseller into different categories and in different countries. So it's a fun thing to do, because saying that you're an Amazon number one bestseller, that is one thing, but you don't stop there. It's not like, okay, goodbye. You need to then take this, run with this. And that's what I'm hoping to do with people, have them on my podcast. I can't have all 30. I didn't have time to get them all on the podcast. So I've got Brad and Dr. Peter Stapleton. I've got some of the main people, but I'm going to interview people on the at the party, give them 5 minutes of not everyone, but the people who can attend, and then come on my podcast for 30 minutes. And then we're going to chop those up, as you know, with Opus clips and put that out there. So as the weeks and months go by, so that the book will have tentacles for the authors, that they can go onto podcasts and tell their particular speciality. And what will happen next year on April the 17th, there's going to be a birthday celebration of that book, and maybe another book, in the
Ah,
series. But
yeah.
at least they have a
Another book.
reason. Yeah, I'm hoping there'll be a second by then. But the point is, we will have a reason. When we often, as authors, we forget that we have a birthday for our books, and we carry on with the next book. But for this book, I want every year there's going to be a birthday celebration, because it's going to be Global Tapping
Oh,
Story Day.
that's
So
wonderful.
that's
I
the
love
reason
that.
behind it.
So then should we go to that website that you mentioned, and I'll put the links here in the notes here on the
Yes,
video,
it's
but
a live stream. It's a
hmm
live stream. I've got a link on that site. I've
hmm
got a link to the YouTube live stream,
okay.
and it's going to be on Facebook as well. But I found it a bit difficult to find the link for the Facebook one. The YouTube one is easy, but it's going to be streamed on Facebook and YouTube. So
Great.
it's, I'm hoping it'll just be a fantastic celebration. And during that time, we're going to encourage people, go and buy the book if you haven't. It's only 99 cents.
Yeah.
It's going to be not just buy, but it's, you've heard her story. You're hearing Brad's tapping. Have you
Yeah.
bought your book? And
Yeah. So it's going to be 99 cents on that day, then
yes,
the
for the
launch.
launch.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah. So you definitely want to grab the copy on that day for sure.
Exactly. Exactly. And look, I haven't been making this a big deal of this, but what I've decided is that the first year's profits from the book are being donated to the Peaceful Heart Network. I'm hoping maybe they'll come on even, and I don't want to make it like this is this is a what you call it, a charity thing at all. But
Ah.
I know that I want to give back, and people have paid to be in the book, and I'd like to donate. I don't know what the profits will be for the first year.
Mhm.
People might, I toyed with all profits, but then I thought, well, what happens if I die and in my will I've left, it's too complicated. But I know that if the more people buy the book in the first year, the more we can donate to the Peaceful Heart Network. So that's
Yeah.
something I think I'll mention more now, but I didn't want it to be the lead, make it sound like it's a charity project.
Right, right. But I mean that the fact that you want to give back, and I'm sure people really also appreciate that, that they can be a part of that as well.
Yes, exactly. If I can get someone, well, I'm hoping that they'll come on. I wanted them on the podcast, the Peaceful Heart Network, the couple who started it. And, they do a lot of work in Africa and around the world. Um, they've got a slightly different tapping technique, but it's silent, I think. You don't have to tell a story. And in groups, community groups, they've been sharing tapping. So it's a wonderful thing to support and to be part of. Yes, it's part of the global healing. It's time to heal. It's time to tell our stories. It's time to be seen and heard, and for tapping to come into its own. I mean, let's face it. One of the reasons that I'm so happy Dr. Peter Stapleton's in the book. She grounds it in the science, but these stories are from the heart. But we
Right.
need to know that it's becoming more and more validated by science than ever before. And
Yes.
so it's a proven technique that reduces cortisol and stress and therefore helps our whole system, nervous system, body. And the book is divided into body, mind,
Mhm.
heart, and soul, because some people are talking about, birth re-imprinting, Sharon King,
Right.
and quantum EFT with Jenny Johnson is about past life and mining the Akash for some of your, the rich gifts that you bring.
Right.
So I thought, although we know that every healing of using EFT combines maybe body, mind, spirit. It's not really one or the other. But as you look at the stories in each section, it gives you an idea that that was for eczema or Lyme disease or things like that, and that was for overcoming your, like Dr. Craig Wiener has talked about, overcoming our inner blocks for our businesses, our soulpreneur, our practices, he calls it. What are the biggest blocks that he's found hold people back? So I put that in the mind because it's self-belief often, we tell ourselves that story. And then Mary Sass, who's quite, who's, is in the spiritual, the soul section. So there are people talking more from a spirit and soul aspect of EFT.
Yeah. Wow. It just sounds like an incredible compilation. Yeah, I definitely am so excited for this to happen on April 17th, which is only just a few days from now. And
I know. That's why I'm so happy you've had me on. And of course, I've got a little cohort, of which thankfully you are one, of reviewers, because that's to keep a book going long term, you need reviews, because I'm not going to take out ads on Amazon. It's not that kind of book that I've got the, limitless funds to. But if people leave reviews, I just want to say this.
Mhm.
What it does, by the time you get, say, 50 or 100 reviews, Amazon begins to automatically promote your book. That's why we need reviews. Not,
Right.
not for various reasons. And it would be lovely if people pick out one of the stories and one of the people they know and say, this chapter really moved me. But just so people know, as a marketer and as a publisher, when you get to 100 reviews, Amazon starts to push you more. So the book will go out. And so let's say other people have got tapping books, and there are a lot on Amazon. They will say you might also be interested in Tap Into Your Best Life because of the reviews.
Right.
So thank you for being one of
Yeah,
what we call
reviews
the
are very
advanced.
important. Like you said, they really can make or break your book. So we definitely, authors are always looking for reviews for their books, right?
And we're not allowed to ask our friends, by the way, we would be very careful. Amazon says we can't elicit reviews by offering a bonus. We can offer bonuses. I've told my people for buying the book. You can say, if you buy the book, I'll give you a special bonus. And I'm encouraging people to do that if they can, but never for leaving a review. The
Right.
review
Yeah.
must be what's the word? Scripted.
Yeah,
You must
because
give the
Amazon
person.
has a way of finding out. They verify the purchase and yeah, they definitely will not verify it if they think it was some sort of
Yeah.
off.
But of course, the logarithm today, we don't know it. They're calling it the A9 logarithm. We don't know all the things it does, but what I'm telling you is some of the things it does. It's not like a person sitting there. You can go back and say, but that person isn't a friend, or the logarithm just knocks you out, or
Right.
does this or does that. So we've been very careful to not offer any incentives for reviews, but to offer incentives to buy and then leave an honest review when we can.
Yes, wonderful. Well, before we go, is there anything else you would like everyone to know before we wrap up?
Um, well, just if you can put the website to come to the actual where you can buy the book, because it's all it's already the link to the book is already available. So if you can put that in the notes on
Yep.
Amazon, and you can buy it in any place where Amazon sells books, like Australia or America or England, or we've got one person in Germany, and she said, Carol, when are you going to put the book into German. And I said, well, let's just get it out in English. But that's another story, where it can go. So just come if any my biggest okay. My biggest request is that people join the parties if they can, buy the book on launch day, and make this a huge success for the authors.
Absolutely. I'll be there for sure, and I hope to see everyone else there too.
Okay, thanks, Nika.
Yeah, and can also, Carol, can people reach out to you as far as like, what kind of services do you offer authors? Because I think there's probably a lot of people that are watching this that have always wanted to write a book, or maybe they're already writing, but how can they work with you?
Well, Best Love Publishing does have a website, and if people are interested, there's a link they can, or if they've got a story they think should go into the next book. So if you put my website, bestlovepublishing.co, it's not .com, bestlovepublishing.co is where you can see what I stand for. I do premier ghostwriting. Not, it's like if someone really needs their whole book done. And of course, you know that I'm an AI book coach. So sometimes when people are stuck, I can say, let's jump on AI. As long as you've got your personality and your own story, we can knock it into shape. So I do sometimes offer that as a kind of lead for people who say, look, I'm just stuck with writing my book. There's so much, I'm overwhelmed. And then I help them there. So yeah. So Best
Awesome.
Life Publishing .co.
Okay, for sure.
Thanks.
Well, all those links are going to be below, so definitely check them out and click on them. And we'll see you all at the launch party. Thank you so much, Carol,
Well,
talking with me today. I can't wait to see you on April
been a
17th.
pleasure. Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.